Boy, that is nearly impossible to follow. I spent much of last year on the stump warming up for Congressman John Hall. It's a pleasure, I guess, to follow Congressman John Hall, but I haven't publicly had the opportunity, and I think we all once again deserve and it's necessary that we thank Congressman John Hall, if John is still here, for his efforts. I'm Congressman for us for many years. I left my cheese hat at home as well, but I did bring out a coat. Not to say that I'm going to speak any longer, but maybe a little bit better prepared for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know it, but we're living in ungenerous, unforgiving, and unfair times. Patty mentioned Japan, fellow human beings, and if we haven't already, go home and hug your family, hug your friends, and maybe send a few dollars to the American Red Cross or some other suitable organization. What's happening over there is tragic to those individuals and unfortunately illuminating in many ways for many of us here. Say Indian Point, say energy. There's a lot that we're going to learn from and a lot that we're going to need to do. And wouldn't it be nice once and for all to maybe come out of some bad things with a sustainable energy policy so that we are not hostage to artificial external forces. That's something we obviously have to work towards and something for the future for sure. Wisconsin's a lovely state. I took my daughter up to visit. Madison is a wonderful community. They have a pretty good football team depending on who you root for. But Wisconsin obviously has very quickly come to mean something else. And perhaps as Lexington and Concord, and they are in Massachusetts by the way, do mean shots of independence, Wisconsin will probably be a wake-up call, and many of us now and in the future are going to look to it beyond just as a state, beyond a state of mind, but basically the beginning of hopefully some good things that are going to happen, not the end of some good things that we in fact did enjoy. Greed and fear are rampant, and I know that because I spent a lot of time throughout campaign this past year meeting and greeting a lot of people, and unfortunately there are times of ungenerosity, and there are people who in tough economic times tend to pull in, tend to look inwards, and tend to, in a self-introspection, aren't necessarily as generous to others as they should be or could be. And in fact, bad things unfortunately begin to ensue from there. John Kennedy said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." A clarion call slightly before my generation, but one that symbolized the generation at the time, and maybe it's time to come up with our modern version of that. Because if in fact we recognize an obligation beyond ourselves, beyond our four walls, beyond our immediate family, but to others, in the end, we will be better off because of that. And the attacks on the middle class, the attacks on our union brothers and sisters, the attacks on our teachers and those who plow the highways or are out late at night in snowstorms, the attacks on those who keep us safe, the attacks on those who take care of us in healthcare institutions. That is us, ladies and gentlemen. We are them. And so I'm not here for class warfare. I'm not here to even note it nor to decry it, but to say that that's not something that can stand. That's not something that, in fact, we should move towards. The history of unions goes back. Haymarket in the 1880s, and we understand the Pinkertons, and you understand the whole progressive movement, populist movement, the turn of the century, and you mentioned the factories where literally women were enclosed and died because of the fire. Think of all the gains we've made, and New York has been the epicenter of that. We cannot let that go backwards. I'm county legislator. I understand that the bargaining table, negotiating table, that in fact collective bargaining is the hallmark of fairness, and collective bargaining is where in fact compromise appropriate is brought about. You give a little bit, we give a little bit, and in the process we continue to move forward. And to artificially change that is a little bit like bringing your basketball down to the court and you're losing in the game and you say, you know what, I'm going to change the rules. It's my ball, my court, my rules. We're not going to play it that way. If you have disagreements as a government official on pensions, if you have disagreement on health care, on salaries, on working conditions, A collective bargaining process is whereby both sides are adequately and fairly represented, and that's the appropriate court of decision and discord. Not to artificially say that we're going to give in to fear and greed, and we're going to do away with collective bargaining. That's a fundamental unfairness. Ladies and gentlemen, if our democracy has gone to anything or come to anything, it is that we are fundamentally fair. And any process that undermines that, we need to stand with those who agree. We need to fight against those who, in fact, are trying to change the rules. That's fundamentally unfair.
All right.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, Wisconsin, while one of 50, is emblematic of what's happening in Washington, D.C. We've all seen it. Different groups are sending them around. And we have emails of all the various, and John went through some of the descriptions of what's been pared and cut, and we've all worked hard to put them in place. You know what it is, ladies and gentlemen? It's something more than simply you versus me. I'm going to benefit and you're going to suffer. Ladies and gentlemen, there is an unsophisticated view and a misunderstanding about what, in fact, we have brought our government to bear. It is, ladies and gentlemen, a recognition that we support and have worked hard to bring about investments in capital, in human capital, investments in our community, in public safety, investments in the quality of life, in fact, that we have fought hard for and do not want to give back. And there's a fundamental lack of knowledge, lack of sophistication, and our current representative, who somehow these pass for good public policy, destroying 700,000 jobs.
Must be on purpose. It's starting to feel that,
analysis. Cutting $1.3 billion from community health centers. See, literally, the alarm is going that, in fact, what we're facing is most problematic. You know, that will deprive more than 3 million low-income people of health care. We at Westchester County, you, in your tax dollars, support community health care centers. Without that $1.3 billion, you know where those people wind up? In your emergency rooms with last stage cancer, where in fact we could have invested in a humane fashion at on a much cheaper basis and gotten people well instead of the most expensive fashion in an emergency room. It's a lack of sophistication. It's a lack of understanding that that's an investment in human capital and that's an investment in saving dollars for all of us. How can you kick 200,000 children out of preschool by cutting funds for Head Start and then someday have to wonder why perhaps the crime wave comes back, and in fact you then need to put more police officers and public safety officers. Invest today and reap the benefits tomorrow. Yeah! How can you cut financial aid for 9.4 million students, prospective and existing students in education? How can you cut infrastructure? How can you vote for a bridge to nowhere, which I believe this current House Representatives support, and certainly a famous governor in the past supported.
The bridge is back.
But in fact, cut off the bridges that we need to get somewhere, and we need to make our lives more valuable and more enriched. How can you throw 10,000 low-income veterans into homelessness by cutting in half the number of veterans who get housing vouchers this year? When you look at what's happening in Wisconsin, and you look what's happening in Washington, and you look what's happening here, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be ungenerous. It doesn't have to be a zero sum. It does not have to be fear and greed. So what are we going to do about it? We can complain, and we can rally, we can protest, we can debate, we can social media, we can Facebook, we can Twitter, we can do whatever else is one supposed to do today, all appropriate to mobilize. And ladies and gentlemen, I learned firsthand, and we all need to learn time and time again. Ladies and gentlemen, we can mobilize, and we can take back common sense and recognize investments, recognize what our government is for. But ladies and gentlemen, come November, it all comes down to, and it is your responsibility, and I'm not going to ask, no show of hands, no poll, no census, but if I ask how many of you here did not vote in November, my guess is a few hands are going to go up, and that's here. And next November, no complaining. go out and vote. And the following November, no complaining. That's how we in this society register our acceptance or our acquiescence. And I, for one, am not giving up. None of us should. Thank you very much.